Welcome back, everyone. We're here with Ken Cail. Ken has had a terrific career in sports broadcasting, amongst other things, and I'm really excited to talk to him. Voice of the Monarchs. I grew up watching some of the Monarchs highlights on YouTube to your voice, so it's very cool to meet with you. I'm excited for this, and welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Drew. As a matter of fact, truth be told, I listen to them from time to time myself. In fact, today, as we record this on June 13th, it was 9 years ago on this date that the Monarchs won the Calder Cup in Utica, New York in 5 games. And I understand you were there for one of the games.
I was there for game 1 of that series. I remember sitting in the first row with my dad, and they won 3-2 in overtime. That was a terrific game. And after the game, I went home. I watched the highlights to your voice on YouTube. So
well, thank you. Thank you for that. And it was a great run with the Monarchs for 15 years and more years with the ECHL team as well. A great privilege to do it. I'm just sorry, as are many, that we don't have professional hockey in New Hampshire anymore.
Yeah, so am I. That was great while it lasted. Who knows, hopefully at some point down the line they can bring hockey back to New Hampshire at that level.
Well, I think many people would like to see it, and especially now there's been an absence of quite some time now, and I think there's a fever for it now, and we have, even if you brought the SNHU Arena back into the American Hockey League, right now, I think it would be one of the better buildings in the league, in the AHL, right now. And, that building now is over 20 years old, but it's still been very well maintained and unfortunately doesn't get as much use as it once did.
Yeah, that's too bad. I know they still hold concerts and stuff like that from there time to time. So what I wanted to get into was the study of your career. Melrose, Massachusetts, your hometown, and then ended up attending high school there. So can you tell us a little bit about that high school experience and just how you started to put together what you wanted to do with your life career-wise?
Well, as far as my high school career is concerned, I was never much of an athlete. I played some little league, some junior high basketball, but really not much of an athlete. And I always was a fan of radio, no matter what it was, whether it was the news on the radio, music on the radio, sports. I was an only child, so I kind of had to entertain myself. So I had a little all-star baseball game that I used to play, and I used to have to be both teams in this all-star baseball game, but announced it as I went along in my bedroom, not to anybody in the outside world. And I did that with music as well. Had an old record player and 45s, and read the news out of the newspaper. And so that's what I was always into radio for whatever reason. I mean, I have no relatives that were into radio, but they listened to the radio, and it was a great experience growing up in Boston in that era, in the Boston area. They had so many great radio personalities, whether it be doing music shows or doing the news or doing all the sports, baseball, hockey, basketball, baseball, whatever it might be. And as it turned out, one of the guys who I listened to faithfully over the years, who I think is still the best radio voice of all time, the late great Bob Wilson, who did Boston Bruins games for many years on WBZ radio in Boston. So how I got into radio technically in high school. And it was one night in October. The Bruins at one time had their American Hockey League team, called the Boston Braves, play at the old Boston Garden. I mean, the Bruins played there, the Braves played there, and ultimately they had a World Hockey Association franchise there. So a friend of mine and myself went to the first ever Boston Braves game at the old Boston Garden, the American Hockey League game. And I looked up into the rafters into the broadcast booth, and I saw Bob Wilson. I knew who he was. I didn't know him at all. And he was just up there with an engineer, a guy who was responsible for putting the game on the radio. And Bob was up there. He had no color man or no statistician. So the next morning, it was a Saturday morning, I wrote him a letter. Now, I had written many letters like this in the past, asking, if they needed any help on the broadcast, I'd run to get their coffee, whatever it was they needed, keep stats, whatever. And usually I got no response, or they would say, well, we'll consider it, and we'll keep your name on file, whatever. Now, this was a Friday morning, a Saturday morning that I wrote the letter, mailed it that day, and believe it or not, and this is it was unbelievable to me at the time, and still is in a way. I was out in my backyard in Melrose, Mass, playing wiffle ball with my friends, and my father comes to the door and said, "You have a phone call." Now, back then, I was in high school. I didn't get many phone calls. Bill collectors weren't chasing me then, and I didn't have any girlfriends at the time. And so anyway, he said, "Bob Wilson is on the line." And I said, I told my parents that I had written the letter, and I thought they might have told somebody, and somebody was trying to impersonate him on the phone.
Yeah.
Because I thought, there's no way I wrote this on Saturday morning, and this is Monday afternoon, and he's calling me. And I said, but if they're trying to fool me, they won't, because he had the most distinctive voice, and I knew that nobody could impersonate him. And so I said hello, rather sheepishly. And he said, "Bob Wilson." And he said, I got your letter, and now, why don't you come in on Friday? I have a Braves game, Boston Braves AHL game. Why don't you come in, keep stats, and we'll see how it goes. So I did, and met him at the press gate at the old Boston Garden, and took me up to the broadcast booth, and gave me the stat sheet. I sat right next to him, kept stats for him. I guess it went okay, because he asked me back the next week, and it was great. It was a great entrance into radio. I mean, I wasn't on the radio, but I could see how the radio broadcast was done, and what he did to prepare, and all that sort of thing. So I kept stats for him for the Braves for about a year and a half, and then I got a call from him one night saying that the gentleman who was keeping stats for him for the Bruins had to move, because he was working with Delta Airlines, and the new headquarters was going to be in Atlanta, so he had to move to Atlanta, and so couldn't keep his stats anymore. So he said, "Would you be interested?" And of course I was. I was still in high school, and so we did that for a couple of years, and he was, I guess, happy with what I did. And then one night I got a call from him and said, "There's an opening for a producer at WBZ Radio." And I said, "A producer?" I said, I was never even on a radio station. I did all my work with him at the Garden, just keeping stats and that sort of thing. And he said, "Yeah." He said, behind the scenes work. I can set up an interview with the program director, and we'll see how it goes. I said, "Sure." I never thought that I would have the opportunity to actually get the job. Yeah, even to interview for it was an experience.
That's awesome.
But I actually did get the job at WBZ Radio. I had graduated from high school at that time, or just had graduated, and was starting to go to the Leland Powers School of Radio, Television, and Theater in Boston. And I was there, and I got the job at WBZ. I still continue to go to the broadcasting school, but I learned more really in a couple of days at WBZ than I did my entire year at Leland Powers. So it was just a great experience. I have Bob Wilson to thank for giving me that opportunity, and WBZ for hiring me at such a young age. It was a great experience. Got to work with some of my radio idols that I had listened to for years on the radio. So that was a great experience.
Wow, that is fantastic. I'm thrilled in hearing about that. So can you talk about moving to New Hampshire and just how that whole process happened, and then we'll get into the Monarchs, which I'm really excited to discuss.
Yeah, okay. I worked at WBZ till 1976, from 72 through 76, and then had the opportunity I was working at WBZ with a talk show host by the name of Jerry Williams, who was very popular. WBZ had a big signal in 37 states in Canada at night, and Jerry would get calls from all over the country and Canada, and I was his producer. So ultimately, Jerry said some controversial things that ownership at WBZ didn't like, Westinghouse Broadcasting at the time. He was very political, and so he got fired ultimately. And so he asked me if I would like to join him in Hartford, Connecticut for an opportunity to produce his show and also do some work on the air at WTIC in Hartford. So I went with him for a year in Hartford, and then I got an opportunity from a guy I worked with at WBZ, Ken Beatrice, who did a sports show at WBZ back in the 70s. He said there's a station in New Hampshire, WGIR, that's looking for a full-time talk show host, sports talk show host. And because Bob Lobel left the job. Bob Lobel was working at WGIR. He left for WBZ TV, and there was an opening at WGIR in Manchester for a full-time sports talk show host. So the money wasn't great, but I took it for the experience, and that's how I wound up in New Hampshire for the first time at WGIR, doing a sports talk show at night, and also doing occasional games on the radio as well.
So when you started doing games, was it high school games? Was it different college games, or what was it exactly?
First game ever that I did play-by-play for was the Queen City Invitational Tournament in Manchester, basketball tournament. And they were having it at Southern New Hampshire University, or it probably was New Hampshire College back then, but now SNHU. And my broadcast partner was, on my first basketball game, Jack Edwards, who did the Bruins for a long time. Jack and I worked at WGIR together. And so we did every game of that Queen City tournament. And I think we totaled about maybe 16 or 18 games, I can't remember, but we did like 4 in a day. And then maybe 3-4 game days, and then a championship, semifinal, you name it. It was like 16 games in 4 or 5 days. And so we just switched back and forth. I did the color for the game. He was doing the play-by-play and vice versa. So that was my first play-by-play experience, doing the Queen City Invitational Tournament in Manchester.
Wow, Jack Edwards. So are you still friends with him to this day?
I see him and talk with him occasionally, not very often, but I know that he's left his post. He had some physical issues, but a good guy, and was a long-time voice of the Bruins, and did a great job, and there was no doubt about who he was rooting for. That's for sure. And that's it's the same with me and the Monarchs. There was no doubt about who I was rooting for at the time. But Jack was great, and it was fun working with him. In fact, I did my first play-by-play hockey game with Jack. In fact, Jack worked at GIR at the same time I was there, and he really had more hockey experience than I did, because he did games for 2 or 3 years at UNH when he was there. So he had more hockey experience than I did, although I did get to sit next to Bob Wilson for several hockey seasons doing the Braves and the Boston Bruins. So that really helped. That really helped. And if I patterned my hockey broadcasting after anybody, it would be Bob Wilson. The way he called the game, one of the things that people always talked about with Bob was the way he called the fights. People loved the way he called the fights, and so having been with him for several seasons, I heard him call many fights. And his first job in radio was in Louisiana. I'm talking about Bob Wilson now. And the first thing he had to do in radio was call boxing matches. So that's why he was so good at calling the hockey fights, because he was an old boxing broadcaster. I didn't have that luxury of being a boxing broadcaster. But Bob taught me a lot, And people then subsequently over the years talked about the way they liked the way I called the fights as well. So I took that as a big compliment. So I got started with the Monarchs. When they first started, I had been doing a lot of high school hockey and some college hockey on a regional network at that time. And this was a job I really went after because I knew it had my name on it. I had done a lot of local, mostly high school hockey, some college, but had never called a professional game. And I know that they had, a lot of tapes and resumes from people who had done a lot of professional games. But I had my tape, gave it to Jeff Eisenberg, who was the president of the Monarchs at the time when they first came to Manchester. And he seemed to like me. And I think the fact, too, which helped, is that I was kind of established in the area. And, to some I was a name that they were familiar with. I'd been in the market for, like 15 years before the Monarchs came along at various places and done a lot of games over the years, all sports. So I think that familiarity helped, and Jeff ran into people that knew me and knew my reputation such as it was. And so Jeff hired me. I'll be eternally grateful to him for that, because really it was the ride of a lifetime. I couldn't have asked for anything more back in 2001 when they got started.
What was your favorite part about being part of the Monarchs organization?
I just think calling the games was really, I love doing hockey. A small confession here, it's actually not my favorite sport to watch.
Really?
But it's my favorite sport to call.
What's your favorite sport to watch?
I honestly love baseball. I really love baseball. And I really enjoy hockey. But quite frankly, it's not my favorite sport. But I love calling it. It has a great flow to it, and I think it's the best game to call. And if people ask me, well, boy, it's so fast and all that stuff, but it is, there's no doubt. But I always tell people that if you're prepared, the game kind of calls itself. I mean, if you are prepared and know the rosters, you're always familiar with your team, but you have to get used to the other team. But if you're prepared and know everybody's numbers, it kind of calls itself. Because I always tell people, and I believe that to this day, that in calling a hockey game, there are really fewer variables than there are in any other sport, really. There's only so much that can happen in a hockey game. I mean, goals are scored, there are penalties called, there's some fighting once in a while, not as much as there used to be, but still just a little bit of it. But there aren't that many variables in a hockey game. Whereas in a baseball game, for example, you might have been calling games for 30 years, and you'll see something in a baseball game that you might have never seen before. And the same is true with football, maybe to a lesser extent basketball, but in baseball and football in particular, there are many things that you don't see on a regular basis. I mean, hockey's a very exciting game to watch. It's a great game as far as I'm concerned to call, but it's all out there, and there's really not a whole lot of variables. There's offsides, there's icings, there's goals, but most of it is pretty much by the book. So that's the way I see it anyway. Some people think I'm crazy to say that, but it's true. That's the way I see it.
Okay, so for you, I just want to talk a little bit about that Calder Cup run in 2015,
sure.
And go over that, and then I have a couple more questions I would like to get into afterwards.
Oh, no problem. Well, the Calder Cup run was amazing. They brought in a new coach, Mike Stothers, who had a lot of AHL coaching experience in the past, and we had some terrific players on that team as well. I mean, we were a pretty well stacked team at that time. The Monarchs led by the likes of Colin Miller, who's gone on to the NHL, and Nick Dowd, and Adrian Kempe, and some pretty good
Michael
goals.
Mersch, I remember he
Yep,
scored
Mike
that
Mersch.
corner goal.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. And Jordan Wheel, and it's so many.
Vincent Laverty.
Vincent, great defenseman and a great guy, Vincent Laverty. And, we had just a great team. They were great guys. I've always found, and I always tell everybody, that the best players in sports, in terms of getting along with, interviews, that sort of thing, are hockey players. They're very accessible, they're very friendly, down-to-earth guys. And I think of all the sports that I've worked in, it was a pleasure working with them. In fact, Paul Bissonnette, who's made quite a name for himself on the network now, Paul Bissonnette was a part of that team.
Yeah, I looked that up, I think, a year ago, and I was like, I cannot remember him being there, but I saw that on like hockeyreference.com.
And what he brought now was, he was great for team chemistry. Everybody liked him. He's a funny guy, and had a lot of experience both in the AHL and in the NHL. And so he was kind of a glue guy, if you will. It brought in some experience because generally it's a younger team, but he was one of the older players, maybe the oldest on the team. But he really had a way of connecting with people, as he does on TV. And so he was a great acquisition by the Monarchs mid-season. I remember the first time I met him was in a lobby of a hotel in Providence. And normally you have to, if a player is coming in new, normally I would go up and introduce myself as the broadcaster. He actually beat me to the punch because, not literally, but he actually came up and introduced himself to me. So he's a very good guy, and I'm glad that he's having the success in working with Wayne Gretzky all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, what about that? Huh? You can't get much better than that. And he deserves it. He's a good guy.
Yeah, so a couple of things I wanted to get into. One was sports and the other was communications, and just the way both have evolved over the years.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned earlier how you had one of your friends got fired from a position because of like saying too much. Without getting too much into the weeds of it, what's your overall read on this whole thing where, like, obviously you want to be civil when you're on camera or you're on radio, and you don't want to go after anybody too viciously, unnecessarily, but you don't want to be censored to the point where you can't voice your own opinion, and everybody's got the right to free speech.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And I think these days, there's maybe too much of going after people, whether they be athletes or politicians for that matter, or whatever field of endeavor they might be in. But I try not to bash too much, although I think I say enough where people know where I stand on things, but yet, not try to go overboard. But I think there is a lot of, especially now when you have, when you have the internet and there are so many podcasts and XM radio and all that, they have a platform for that because they can get away with anything now and say virtually anything they want. And I mean, it's sometimes entertaining to listen to. I'm not that kind of broadcaster. I mean, I'm not going to be a shock jock of any kind like that. I might voice my opinion on some things, and people always knew where I stood. The biggest issue I ever had or ever talked about at any length over a period of years on the radio when I had talk shows was expanded gaming. In New Hampshire. There was a lot of talk a number of years ago about building a casino in Salem, where the old Rockingham Park used to be for years, the horse track. And Rockingham Park was just a great facility. Unfortunately, horse racing in many places has gone the way of dog racing. It exists in several larger tracks around the country, and that's about it. And Rockingham ultimately went out of business, and the land was there, and the location off exit 1 in Salem, New Hampshire, I thought was just an outstanding location for a casino. And just one casino in New Hampshire, and there was a lot of opposition to it. My good friend, the Lion of the Senate, Lou D'Alessandro, was always backing a casino for New Hampshire because he knew it would bring in a lot of revenue, but there was also a lot of opposition to it as well. And ultimately, it got to a vote in the House, and it missed passing by one vote. And very sad day for some of us, very happy day for others. So that, pardon the pun, but that horse has left the barn. And now we don't have one large casino in Salem, but we have like 15 smaller ones scattered around the state, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. They could have had one of the greatest casinos in the country right there in Salem. There were many large casino operators that wanted to get in there, and I just think it's too bad. So I took a stand on that issue. But as far as politics in general, I do a talk show now every morning, but we have politicians on, but I let them say their piece and question them on some things. But for the most part, I like to play it pretty straight as I can anyway.
All right, so now for the sports side of things, we've seen an evolution in sports, whether it be just with coaching style, where a lot of the players now, coaches have to adapt to their style, and instead of being like aggressive from the start, you have to be a little bit softer and start to win their trust before you can really start to push them. You also see the rule changes now where, like for the NFL, for example, they're focused a lot more on safety and making sure that we keep the game safe and we don't have unnecessary injuries and try and cut down on them. You're never going to completely eliminate them and stuff like that. NHL, we now have more required equipment after that terrible incident where that player died overseas, I think. Now they're all required to wear neck guards, I think, in the NHL. So with all that stuff going on and all those changes, what are some of the things that you note about it, and what's your opinion on them?
I'm all for safety. Any safety adjustments they can make to make the game safer for the players, I'm all for that. What I'm not all for are all the stoppages for elongated replays. That is one thing that really turns me off. I mean, I'm all for getting it right. Don't get me wrong. I want them to make the right call, but you've got some highly skilled professionals out there on the field, whether it be the NFL or Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NHL. I mean, we got by for many years just having the officials on the field or on the ice or on the court making the decisions. And I think they do, for the most part, a great job. I mean, they're going to blow calls, but I think one thing officials have been reluctant to do, and probably what led most to all the replays we see now and all the challenges and what have you, is the fact that they never really wanted to communicate with each other. I mean, let's say there was a famous case of a perfect game in Detroit.
Yep, I remember that.
Years ago, where the first base umpire clearly blew a call on the last play of the game. Now, this was before replay, but if you saw the replay of it, you would know that he clearly blew it. I mean, it wasn't even close. And at the time, none of the other umpires wanted to talk to him about it or discuss it. And I think ultimately things like that led to the amount of replays we see. And I know they have the ability to do it now, and the technology is terrific and all that. But in many cases, I think it kills the momentum of a game. I really do. And so I'm not a huge replay proponent. It has its place, but I would like to see that cut down. I don't think that'll ever happen. I think if anything, there'll be more of it, more dependency on the replay and challenges. But that's one of the things that bothers me. The safety aspect is great. I'm glad they're doing that, and they're well aware of it, and certainly they have improved safety issues for football players and hockey players as well in particular. But the replay aspect of it just doesn't sit well with me.
That's a good point. I hadn't fully thought about the momentum of the game the way you put it. I thought that was really good. My last two things. One is, with you, where you at with your life now? Mostly retired. I know you still have your KXL talk show that you do. Can you give us a little bit of just a viewpoint into your life right now and what you enjoy about it?
Well, what I enjoy about it is having 3 grandchildren, and always have a great time with them. They're all in Massachusetts. And they actually, all 3 of them, live in my hometown. I have an older daughter that has 2 children, and my youngest daughter has 1. And so I go down there often. In fact, this coming Saturday, my oldest grandchild, my grandson, is 12, and he's going to be playing in a Little League championship game on Saturday, so I'm excited about that. No replays in Little League. And my granddaughter, my one granddaughter, is a great gymnast, and then I have a grandson who's 1, almost 1, will be 1 in a week or so. So I enjoy the time I spend with my family, and I have a great partner, and we go to many concerts and that sort of thing. My friend Carmen, and she enjoys sports. She enjoys theater, as do I, and concerts, and so we try to squeeze in as many as we can. I love doing I'm affiliated now, and I have been for the last 4 years, with Concord High School, doing their boys varsity games on their Facebook page. That started with COVID, when nobody could go to games, or very few, and parents and grandparents and friends wanted to see them. So Dunk Walsh, the Concord High hockey coach, who I've known for a long time. In fact, I used to call his games. That's how far I go back with Dunk. And he just had a birthday. I won't tell you how old he is. But I did his games when he was in high school at Bishop Brady, and I've known him over the years, and he asked me to do the games, and I was happy to do them. And I do basketball at New England College, and just this past year have started doing the New Hampshire Mountain Kings of the North American Hockey League, which is it's a very good junior caliber of hockey, and it's a great league, and the players in there, many of them earn scholarships to various colleges as a result of playing in that league. A lot of scouts attend, and fans show up. It's fun. They play at Tri-Town and Hooksett. Chris Brown is the owner of the team, and I've known Chris for a while from New Hampshire Distributors, and he puts on a good product, and the league is a very solid one, so happy to be affiliated with them as well.
Okay, and then my final thing is just your advice for other people as you reflect back now on your career, whether it be somebody who's kind of in a similar niche like you, which would be somebody like me who's thinking about this broadcast interview type situation with communications, or somebody who's got a completely different career and they want to do something totally different than what you're doing. But what's your principles of success and how to live your life?
I say work as hard as you possibly can. I know that's a simple thing to say. But if it's something that you have a passion for, I always say, I've been in broadcasting now for over 50 years, and I tell people I've never worked a day in my life, really, in my opinion anyway, or work as hard as most people do, because I enjoy it, and I never, wake up, dreading to go to work in the morning. And I've worked in every shift there is possible in radio, but I think the biggest thing is, to be available to your employer, to work as hard as you can. If you're interested in this profession, you most of the time, and now there's a lot more opportunity now to, practice your craft, I think, than there was, when I was first getting into broadcasting, because back then it was just, TV and AM and FM radio. Now there's all the internet and all the platforms that there are now that people can have their own podcast like you, which I think is great. I think that's a great thing. And so at any rate, I would just say be available. I mean, the most important part is be available, work hard, whatever profession it is. and just obviously do it to the best of your ability. And part of the battle is just showing up sometimes,
Yeah.
and being a good employee, and take as many classes and courses that you can. And I know you're going about it in the right way. You're going to NHTI. What you're doing is great, and I think it's always good to have something to fall back on. I mean, if that one profession that you want to pursue doesn't work out, you might always have something to fall back on, and I think that's great, because in many cases you can do both. So I think that's the best way to look at it.
All right, thanks so much for your time, Mr. Cail.
Drew, thank you.